The billionaire's fiancée slapped the waitress seconds later. The entire restaurant went silent. They say a person's true character is revealed not when they gain power, but when they believe no one can challenge them. The soft glow of crystal chandeliers reflected across polished marble floors as conversations drifted through the Grand Regent, one of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurants. On a Friday evening, every table was occupied by people accustomed to influence, wealth, and attention. Expensive watches caught the light. Fine wine swirled in delicate glasses. Laughter rose and fell beneath the gentle notes of a piano playing near the center of the room. Among the servers moving gracefully between tables was Claire Bennett. At 27, she had mastered the art of becoming invisible when necessary. Her blonde hair was neatly tied back, her uniform pressed perfectly, and her calm blue eyes rarely lingered on any guest for too long. Most people who visited the Grand Regent never remembered her name. Claire preferred it that way. She moved quietly, carried herself with dignity, and treated every customer exactly the same whether they arrived in a limousine or walked through the rain. Tonight should have been no different. Yet from the moment Ethan Calloway entered the restaurant, the atmosphere shifted. Conversations softened. Heads turned. Even those pretending not to notice still noticed. Ethan was one of the youngest billionaires in America, a technology entrepreneur whose face appeared regularly on magazine covers and business networks. Tall, composed, and usually surrounded by advisors, he carried the kind of presence money alone could not buy. Beside him walked Victoria Sinclair, elegant, confident, beautiful in a way that demanded attention the moment she entered a room. The engagement between Ethan and Victoria had become a favorite topic among social columns for months. To the public, they looked like the perfect couple. Claire greeted them with the same professional smile she offered every guest. "Good evening. Welcome to the Grand Regent." Victoria barely glanced at her. Ethan offered a polite nod. The evening continued smoothly at first. Drinks arrived. Appetizers were served. The piano continued playing. But sometimes the smallest misunderstanding becomes the spark that changes everything. As Claire approached their table carrying a tray of sparkling water, a cream-colored envelope slipped slightly from beneath the folder she carried under one arm. Victoria noticed it immediately. Her eyes narrowed. The envelope had Ethan's name written neatly across the front. For a brief second, something cold flashed across her face. "What's that?" she asked sharply. Claire looked down. "Just something I need to deliver later this evening, ma'am." Victoria extended her hand. "Give it to me." The surrounding tables began paying attention. Claire remained calm. "I'm sorry, but I can't do that." The silence between those few words felt heavier than the music filling the room. Victoria rose from her chair. Several nearby guests stopped speaking altogether. Claire stood still. No anger, no fear, just quiet composure. Then, in one sudden motion, Victoria reached toward the envelope. As Claire instinctively stepped back, the movement caused the collar of her uniform to shift slightly. Something hidden beneath the fabric slipped into view for less than a second. A silver pendant, small, elegant, engraved with a symbol few people would recognize. Few people except Ethan Calloway. The color drained from his face immediately. His chair scraped softly against the floor as he stood. Victoria was still focused on Claire. The guests were still watching the confrontation unfold. But Ethan wasn't looking at either of them anymore. His eyes were locked on the pendant resting against Claire's collarbone. A pendant he hadn't seen in nearly 20 years. A pendant that should have been impossible to find in this room. And for the first time that evening, the billionaire looked genuinely shaken. For several endless seconds, nobody moved. The restaurant remained suspended in a strange silence, as if the city itself had paused outside the tall glass windows. Ethan Calloway stared at the silver pendant resting against Claire Bennett's uniform. The symbol engraved into its surface was small enough that most people would have dismissed it as decorative. Ethan knew better. His pulse quickened. Memories he had not touched in nearly 2 decades rose unexpectedly from the corners of his mind. A rainy highway, twisted metal, flashing emergency lights, his father fighting for his life after a devastating accident, and one woman, one stranger who had appeared when nobody else stopped. Claire noticed the change in his expression immediately. Her blue eyes met his for a brief moment before she calmly adjusted her collar, hiding the pendant once again. The movement was subtle, deliberate, as though she already understood exactly what Ethan had recognized. Victoria glanced between them, confusion replacing her earlier confidence. "Ethan?" she asked. "What is going on?" Ethan did not answer. He could not. His attention remained fixed on Claire. The years had transformed countless details, but not that symbol. His father had commissioned only 3 pendants after the accident. One remained in a family safe. One had been buried with the woman everyone believed had disappeared shortly after saving his father's life. The third had never been found. Until now. The piano music continued softly in the background. Glasses clinked. Somewhere near the bar, a server quietly cleared a table. Ordinary sounds suddenly felt distant. Claire lowered her eyes and carefully picked up the envelope that had nearly fallen moments earlier. Her hands remained perfectly steady. "Your water, sir," she said politely, placing the glass in front of Ethan as though nothing unusual had happened. The professionalism of her voice only deepened the mystery. Most people would have been nervous under so much attention. Claire appeared almost prepared for it. Victoria stepped closer. "You know her?" she asked Ethan. "No," he replied automatically. Then he paused. "At least, I do not think so." The answer sounded uncertain even to him. Claire offered a small smile that never fully reached her eyes. It was the smile of someone carrying a secret for a very long time. Across the room, several guests resumed their conversations. The tension began to loosen. The moment seemed ready to pass. Yet Ethan could not let it go. "Where did you get that pendant?" he asked quietly. Claire's expression changed for the first time that evening. Not fear, not surprise, something closer to sadness. A soft shadow passed through her eyes before disappearing again. "It belonged to my mother," she answered. Ethan felt the words strike harder than he expected. His father had spent years trying to locate the woman who saved him. Private investigators had searched across multiple states. Leads appeared and vanished. Eventually, everyone accepted that the mystery would remain unsolved forever. Yet here stood a waitress carrying the one object connected to that forgotten chapter of his family's history. Claire glanced at the envelope in her hands, then toward the exit. For a brief second, it seemed she was considering leaving before the conversation could continue. But fate had already shifted direction. Some stories remain hidden for years. Then one ordinary evening, under the glow of restaurant lights, they begin revealing themselves one piece at a time. Claire Bennett had spent most of her life avoiding attention. It was one of the reasons she liked working at the Grand Regent. People noticed uniforms far less than they noticed designer suits. They remembered celebrities, investors, athletes, and politicians. They rarely remembered the woman quietly refilling their coffee. Tonight, however, anonymity was slipping away with every passing minute. Ethan Calloway remained standing beside the table, unable to look away from her. Questions filled his mind faster than answers. The pendant, her mother, the accident, none of it made sense. Yet something deeper than logic told him this was not a coincidence. Across the room, Victoria Sinclair folded her arms. She was accustomed to being the center of Ethan's attention. Watching him focus entirely on a waitress irritated her more than she wanted to admit. "This is ridiculous," she said. "Ethan, we came here for dinner, not some mystery." Claire lowered her eyes respectfully. "She is right, sir. You should enjoy your evening." Then she carefully slid the cream-colored envelope into her folder. Ethan noticed the movement immediately. "That envelope has my name on it." Claire hesitated. Only briefly. "Yes. Why?" The question hung between them. Around the restaurant, curious glances continued drifting toward their table. The staff pretended to work while secretly listening. Even the piano player seemed to soften his music. Claire exhaled slowly. For years she had imagined this moment differently. Shorter, simpler. She would deliver the envelope and leave. No conversations. No explanations. No recognition. Certainly no pendant revealing itself under the bright restaurant lights. Because it belongs to you, she answered quietly. Ethan frowned. What does? The information inside. Victoria laughed sharply. Information? What kind of information? Claire did not answer her. Instead, she looked directly at Ethan. For the first time all evening, her calm expression revealed genuine concern. Something important. Ethan felt an unexpected chill despite the warmth of the room. Successful people develop instincts. They learn to recognize when someone is selling fear and when someone is carrying the truth. Claire did not look like a woman trying to manipulate a billionaire. She looked like someone carrying a burden. The difference mattered. Open it, Victoria said. Right now. Claire shook her head. Not here. Why not? Victoria pressed. Because some things should not become public entertainment. The answer landed harder than Claire intended. Several nearby guests immediately looked away. Victoria's cheeks flushed. Ethan remained silent. The response sounded exactly like something his late father would have said. Dignified, controlled, respectful even under pressure. Another uncomfortable realization followed. Claire had never once tried to impress him. She had never mentioned his wealth. Never asked for anything. Never even introduced herself beyond what her job required. That alone made her different from most people who entered his world. Then his phone vibrated. A message appeared from his longtime family attorney. Ethan glanced at the screen and felt his stomach tighten. The text contained only one sentence. We found a photograph from 19 years ago. You need to see this immediately. Before Ethan could respond, a second image arrived. His eyes widened. The photograph showed his father standing beside the woman who had saved his life after the accident. And hanging around the woman's neck was the exact same silver pendant now hidden beneath Claire Bennett's uniform. The photograph remained on Ethan Calloway's screen while the sounds of the restaurant faded into the background. For a moment, all he could hear was the steady rhythm of his own heartbeat. 19 years. 19 years of unanswered questions. 19 years of wondering why the woman who saved his father's life had vanished without asking for recognition, money, or gratitude. Yet now her daughter stood less than 10 feet away, carrying the same pendant and looking as though she wished she could disappear before anyone asked another question. Ethan slowly lowered his phone. His eyes returned to Claire. She already knew what he had seen. He could tell by the quiet acceptance in her expression. There was no surprise, no panic, only the calm of someone who had been expecting this moment for a very long time. Victoria shifted impatiently beside him. Can someone explain what is happening? She asked. Because this is becoming absurd. Ethan did not answer immediately. Instead, he turned the phone toward Claire. The photograph filled the screen. Claire's gaze softened the instant she saw it. Her fingers tightened slightly around the folder she carried. I have not seen that picture in years, she whispered. Ethan felt a strange heaviness settle in his chest. Then it is true. Claire nodded. Yes. The answer arrived so simply that it silenced every remaining doubt. Nearby diners pretended not to listen, yet many had stopped eating altogether. The entire room seemed drawn into a story none of them understood. Victoria looked from one face to the other. What exactly is true? Ethan finally spoke. The woman in this photograph saved my father's life. Victoria blinked. And? Ethan's eyes remained fixed on Claire. And that is her mother. Silence followed. Even Victoria struggled to respond. Claire glanced toward the large windows overlooking the Manhattan streets. Yellow taxi lights reflected against the glass while light rain began falling outside. The city continued moving. Inside the restaurant, time seemed frozen. My mother never talked much about that night, Claire said softly. She believed that helping someone did not create a debt. Ethan remembered hearing those same words from his father years ago. Helping someone did not create a debt. The phrase had become almost legendary within the Calloway family because nobody ever discovered who originally said it. Until now. Victoria crossed her arms. If this is some attempt to get money from Ethan, it is not going to work. Claire looked genuinely saddened by the accusation. I do not want anything from Mr. Calloway. Then she lifted the envelope slightly. In fact, I came here to help him. Ethan immediately focused on the folder. What is inside? Claire hesitated. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows. Inside, the chandeliers cast golden light across polished tables. The contrast made the moment feel strangely intimate despite the crowded room. Claire finally met Ethan's gaze. The reason I am here has nothing to do with my mother. Her voice remained calm, but something serious lingered beneath every word. The reason I am here is because someone close to you is about to make a very expensive mistake. For the first time that evening, a shadow crossed Victoria Sinclair's face. It appeared only for a second, but Claire noticed it, and so did Ethan. The words settled over the table like a sudden drop in temperature. Someone close to you is about to make a very expensive mistake. Ethan Calloway studied Claire Bennett carefully. She had not raised her voice. She had not tried to create drama. In fact, she seemed almost uncomfortable being the center of attention. Yet every person within earshot had become completely silent. Victoria Sinclair forced a small laugh. It sounded rehearsed. This is unbelievable, she said. A waitress walks over with a mysterious envelope and suddenly everyone acts like she is an FBI investigator. Claire remained calm. I never claimed to be anything other than a waitress. Victoria shook her head. Then perhaps you should stay in your lane. Ethan noticed something important. Claire did not react to the remark. No anger, no embarrassment, just patience. The kind of patience people develop after carrying responsibility for a long time. What is in the envelope? Ethan asked again. Claire looked down at the cream-colored folder in her hands. For several seconds she seemed to debate whether she should continue. Then she made her decision. 3 months ago, I started noticing unusual meetings taking place here. Victoria's expression tightened slightly. This is a restaurant. People have meetings. Claire nodded. They do. Her voice remained gentle. But most people do not leave confidential documents behind. Ethan leaned forward. Documents. Claire carefully opened the folder. Inside were copies of financial records, meeting schedules, and handwritten notes. She did not hand them over yet. Instead, she looked directly at Ethan. I work 6 days a week. Most guests never notice me. They speak freely because they assume servers are invisible. Ethan understood immediately. Some of the most valuable information in the world was discovered by people nobody paid attention to. Claire continued. At first I thought I was misunderstanding what I heard. Then I started seeing the same names appear repeatedly. Victoria crossed her arms. And you decided to play detective? Claire ignored the comment. The names eventually led to a private investment group. Ethan felt his business instincts activate. Which group? Claire slowly removed a single sheet of paper. The Sterling Horizon Fund. Ethan's eyes narrowed. He recognized it immediately. Sterling Horizon was preparing to merge with one of his largest companies. Lawyers had spent months negotiating the deal. Financial analysts called it one of the biggest acquisitions of the year. That is impossible, Victoria said quickly. Too quickly. Claire finally looked at her. Is it? The question was not aggressive. It was quiet, honest, which somehow made it more powerful. Ethan noticed a small bead of tension appear along Victoria's jawline. The reaction lasted only a second, but he had spent years negotiating billion-dollar contracts. He knew when someone became nervous. Claire slid the document across the table. I was going to deliver this privately after your dinner. Ethan lowered his eyes to the page. Several highlighted names appeared near the top. Executives, consultants, advisors. Then his attention stopped on one final name. Victoria Sinclair. The restaurant seemed to disappear around him. Rain continued tapping softly against the windows. The piano player moved into a slower melody. And for the second time that evening, Ethan realized the woman standing before him was not trying to create problems. She was trying to prevent one. The paper remained on the table between them. A single sheet, a single name, yet it carried enough weight to change the direction of an entire evening. Victoria Sinclair stared at the document for a fraction of a second before recovering her composure. "This proves nothing," she said. Her voice was controlled, but Ethan noticed the difference immediately. The confidence was still there. The certainty was not. Claire Bennett remained standing beside the table. The golden light from the chandeliers reflected softly against the silver pendant hidden beneath her uniform. "I agree," Claire said. "One page alone proves nothing." Then she reached into the folder again. Ethan watched as several additional documents appeared. Financial transfers, meeting schedules, copies of correspondence. Everything carefully organized. Everything dated. Victoria's expression hardened. "Where did you get those?" Claire answered honestly. "From people who left them behind." The response sounded almost unbelievable. Yet Ethan knew how often powerful people became careless. Success created blind spots. People stopped paying attention to those they considered unimportant. Sometimes the most overlooked person in the room became the only witness. Ethan slowly examined the records. Several transactions connected Sterling Horizon to offshore accounts. Nothing illegal on the surface. Nothing obvious. But the timing concerned him. Certain payments appeared only days before critical merger meetings. Certain names appeared repeatedly beside consulting agreements that seemed unusually vague. Then he found Victoria's signature attached to an authorization form. His eyes narrowed. "You told me you had no involvement with Sterling Horizon." Victoria immediately responded. "I do not. Not directly." Ethan looked up. "Not directly?" The wording hung in the air. Claire said nothing. She simply allowed the silence to do its work. Victoria exhaled sharply. "Ethan, this is business. My family has investments everywhere. There is nothing unusual about that." Ethan wanted to believe her. A week ago he probably would have. But tonight was becoming a collection of impossible coincidences. Claire's mother, the pendant, the photograph, the documents. None of it felt random anymore. Outside, the rain intensified. Water streamed down the windows overlooking Manhattan. The city lights blurred into streaks of gold and white. Inside the restaurant, the atmosphere had changed completely. People were no longer pretending not to watch. Even the manager stood quietly near the bar, sensing that something important was unfolding. Ethan turned another page, then another. Suddenly he stopped. A handwritten note had been attached to the final document. The handwriting was elegant and careful. The note contained only one sentence. "Follow the ownership trail to the final beneficiary." Ethan's pulse quickened. He opened his phone and accessed a corporate database used by his legal team. The process took less than 30 seconds. As the ownership structure unfolded on the screen, a pattern emerged. Subsidiaries connected to holding companies. Holding companies connected to trusts. Trusts connected to shell entities. Then everything converged toward a single destination. Ethan stared at the name. Victoria saw it too. For the first time that evening, genuine concern appeared in her eyes. Claire lowered her gaze. She already knew what he had discovered. The final beneficiary of the deal was not Sterling Horizon. It was not an investment group. It was not even one of Ethan's competitors. It was someone preparing to gain extraordinary influence over his future. And that someone was standing beside his table. The realization settled over Ethan Calloway with surprising force. For years he had built companies by identifying risks before anyone else could see them. He had trusted data more than emotion, evidence more than assumptions. Yet tonight, standing beneath the warm lights of the Grand Regent, he was being forced to confront a possibility he had never considered. Victoria Sinclair remained perfectly still. That alone told him more than words could. Most innocent people rushed to explain themselves. Most innocent people demanded clarification. Victoria simply watched him, careful, calculating, waiting to see how much he actually knew. Ethan slowly lowered his phone onto the table. "Tell me I am wrong." His voice was calm, almost quiet. Victoria's eyes softened. Ethan, you are drawing conclusions from incomplete information. Claire Bennett remained silent. She understood something important. The truth rarely needed help. It only needed room. Victoria stepped closer to Ethan. You know me. Ethan looked at her. The statement should have felt comforting. Instead, it felt complicated. Because suddenly he realized how much of their relationship had existed inside carefully controlled environments. Charity galas, business events, private dinners, public appearances, perfect photographs, perfect headlines, perfect narratives. Claire gently closed the folder. Her role in the evening had never been to expose anyone publicly. She had only intended to deliver the information. The rest belonged to Ethan. Why? Ethan finally asked. Victoria frowned. Why what? Why hide your involvement? The question lingered between them. Rain continued falling outside. The piano music drifted softly through the dining room. Somewhere in the kitchen, plates clinked against stainless steel. Ordinary sounds. Extraordinary moment. Victoria exhaled. Because you would not have understood. Ethan's expression hardened slightly. Try me. For the first time, frustration appeared in her eyes. Everything becomes easier when people stop pretending business is personal. Claire noticed several guests exchange uncomfortable glances. Victoria was speaking honestly now, perhaps more honestly than she intended. The merger creates opportunities, Victoria continued. Influence, access, growth. Ethan listened carefully. One word stood out. Not partnership, not innovation, not employees. Influence, access, growth. The language of acquisition, not stewardship, not trust. Claire lowered her gaze. She remembered the first time she had overheard Victoria speaking with one of the investors months earlier. The conversation had sounded less like a future spouse discussing a shared future and more like an executive discussing an asset. At the time, Claire had hoped she misunderstood. Tonight removed that hope completely. Ethan slowly shook his head. You never mentioned any of this. Victoria's answer came immediately. Because I knew you would say no. Silence followed. Deep, unavoidable. The sentence revealed more than every document in Claire's folder. Ethan looked away from Victoria and toward Claire. The contrast struck him immediately. One woman had spent months gathering information that could protect someone she barely knew. The other had hidden information from someone she claimed to love. Neither woman raised her voice. Neither woman argued. Yet the difference between them suddenly felt impossible to ignore. Then Ethan's phone vibrated again. A new message arrived from his attorney. The subject line contained only 4 words. Additional records confirmed. Ethan opened the attachment. As the file loaded, his eyes widened. Because the new evidence did not merely support Claire's warning. It revealed something far bigger than anyone at the table had imagined. The attachment opened slowly, each second stretching longer than the last. Ethan Calloway stared at the screen while the glow from the phone reflected in his eyes. The file contained a series of legal records, trust agreements, and internal communications collected by his attorney's team. What began as a question about a merger suddenly expanded into something far more personal. The final pages revealed a timeline, dates, meetings, recommendations, strategic decisions. And beside many of them appeared the same name, Victoria Sinclair, not as a passive investor, not as an observer, as an active architect. Ethan felt a quiet disappointment settle over him. Not anger, not yet, something heavier, the realization that trust, once questioned, never looked quite the same again. Victoria noticed the change immediately. Ethan, she said carefully, you are looking at fragments of a much larger picture. He raised his eyes from the screen. Then help me understand the picture. For the first time that evening, Victoria struggled to answer. Claire Bennett remained silent beside the table. Her shift should have ended nearly 40 minutes earlier. Yet she stayed. Not because she wanted recognition. Not because she wanted to participate. Only because leaving now would mean abandoning the reason she had come. Outside, the rain continued falling across Manhattan. Headlights glided through wet streets. Inside, the restaurant had become remarkably quiet. The piano player had stopped altogether. Several guests sat motionless, pretending to focus on their meals while listening to every word. Ethan scrolled further through the report. Then he stopped again. A particular document caught his attention. It was a proposal drafted nearly 6 months earlier. The proposal described a future restructuring plan for several Callaway companies after the merger was completed. Certain voting rights would gradually shift. Certain board positions would change. Certain assets would be consolidated under newly created entities. Nothing illegal. Nothing dramatic. Yet the pattern was unmistakable. Someone had been planning years ahead. "You expected this deal to give you influence over the entire company," Ethan said quietly. Victoria looked away. The silence became its own answer. Claire felt a wave of sadness she had not anticipated. Months ago, when she first discovered the documents, she had hoped there was an innocent explanation. She wanted to believe she had misunderstood. People were complicated. Mistakes happened. But every new piece of evidence pointed in the same direction. Ethan slowly placed the phone on the table. "Why did you never tell me?" Victoria's voice softened. "Because I knew you would see it the wrong way." Ethan shook his head. "No, I would have seen it honestly. The distinction mattered. More than either of them realized." Victoria opened her mouth to respond, then stopped. There were no perfect explanations left. No carefully managed narratives. No polished public image capable of repairing what transparency could have prevented. Claire quietly gathered the documents inside her folder. Her responsibility was finished. Ethan had the truth. What happened next belonged entirely to him. She took a small step backward, preparing to leave. Then Ethan noticed something else inside the report. A final note from his attorney. A short paragraph attached at the very end. His eyes moved across the words once, then twice. Suddenly, he looked up at Claire with genuine astonishment. Because according to the investigation, Claire had been offered a substantial amount of money months earlier to stay silent, and she had refused every dollar. The revelation seemed to affect Ethan Callaway more than every document that had come before it. He looked at the attorney's note again, searching for some indication that it might be wrong. There was none. The report was clear. Months earlier, after questions about certain transactions began circulating among a small group of investors, someone had approached Claire Bennett privately. The offer had been generous. More money than many people earned in years. The condition had been simple. Forget what she had seen. Forget what she had heard. Walk away. Ethan slowly lifted his eyes toward Claire. "You refused." Claire looked almost uncomfortable being asked about it. "Yes." "Why?" She hesitated. Not because she was hiding anything. Because the answer seemed obvious to her. "Because it was not mine to sell." The restaurant fell completely silent. No dramatic speech followed. No celebration. Just a simple sentence spoken by a woman wearing a server's uniform. Yet somehow it carried more weight than all the expensive conversations that had filled the room earlier that evening. Victoria Sinclair looked away. For the first time, she seemed unable to meet anyone's eyes. Ethan stood motionless beside the table. Throughout his career, he had met brilliant executives, influential politicians, and famous entrepreneurs. Many spoke passionately about values. Many spoke eloquently about integrity. Yet tonight the person who demonstrated those values most clearly was someone the room had barely noticed when the evening began. Claire quietly gathered the remaining papers and placed them back inside the folder. Her work was finished. The truth no longer belonged to her. It belonged to the people who needed to face it. Ethan glanced toward Victoria. The disappointment in his eyes was impossible to miss. Not because of the business implications. Not because of the merger. Because trust had been treated like a strategy instead of a responsibility. Neither of them spoke for several moments. Eventually Victoria picked up her purse. Her expression remained composed, but the confidence that had defined her arrival was gone. Without another argument, she turned and walked toward the exit. The sound of her heels faded into the distance before disappearing completely behind the restaurant doors. Rain continued falling outside. Ethan watched the door close, then slowly turned back toward Claire. "You could have taken the money." Claire smiled softly. "My mother taught me something a long time ago." Ethan waited. Claire glanced down at the silver pendant resting against her collar. "Character is what you keep when nobody is watching." Ethan felt those words settle deeply within him. Around the restaurant, people began rising from their tables. One person started clapping quietly, then another. Soon the entire dining room joined in. Not for a scandal, not for a billionaire, not for a business victory, for dignity. Claire's cheeks turned slightly pink. She never wanted attention, yet she accepted the moment with quiet grace. Ethan stepped aside as she prepared to leave. "Thank you," he said sincerely. Claire nodded once. Then she walked toward the door and disappeared into the rainy Manhattan night. The applause gradually faded. The restaurant returned to normal. But everyone who witnessed that evening carried the same lesson home with them. Wealth can command attention. Power can command obedience. But respect is earned only by those who choose what is right when doing otherwise would be easier.